It's showtime at the Apollo. Some of y'all don't know about that. We're going to jump right into this, man. Welcome to CNN. I am the underdog. I'm your host, and I'm the underdog, Kirk Kennedy. I'm the underdog because you are underdog, and together we're dogs for life. Let's go in. In this channel, on this channel, every video, we try to take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. All right. So let me just say this on the front end about this video. I need to say a couple things because I am convinced that in the society that we live in, which I've said hand over fist, that we're a very sensitive society. I think we've turned into a society of sissies, if I'm being honest. People are going to get offended. So I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm kind of being facetious on one level, to be honest. But there's a part of it that's like, look, some of you are going to be offended and you're probably going to unsubscribe. And thank you for the time that you've been here. Appreciate you. But I keep it 1,000 no matter what I do. And I know that's not, some people aren't going to like that. So let me say that on the front end. Also, let me say this on the front end. Because we're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but we do. So let me make this clear for everyone who's watching this video. All right. And also, if you're a follower of the channel, thank you. Like and subscribe, tell your friends, all of that, right? But you know me enough to know what I'm about to say is true for me. All right. So if you are watching this video, especially if you don't know me, you've never seen me, don't judge a book by its cover. Let me tell you this. I am not politically, I am not on the right or the left. I'm black. I got dreads. I'm chubby. I'm an ex-street dude, been locked up, drugs, guns, prison, all of that. And you would think that I vote left. I've never voted left or Democrat in my life. I do not trust the Democrats at all. I think they wild out. Having said that, even though I'm a conservative from a value perspective, I'm not a conservative politically. I do not trust them. I think they lie to Christians, which I am, the same way the left lies to black people, which I am. So I am literally between two worlds. I do not support either political party. So if you judge what I'm about to say based on that, then that's your sinful judgment, not something that I'm saying. I'm telling you who I am on the front end because I'm about to say some things in this review that I think is just, you're going to understand my perspective and where I'm coming from. All right. I'm not on the left or the right. You may judge that I look like I vote. I've never voted left in my life. Never and never will. And I'm a conservative in values, but I am not a conservative politically. I do not trust Trump. I do not trust Kamala Harris. I do not trust the political system, but we have to live with it. This is what we did, and this is what we have. I'm not saying you have to think like me. I'm saying this so that you understand, process this video from what I say I am and what I'm presenting, not for what you think that you somehow know my motives that you don't. All right. Having said that, let's do this. This is going to be an unorthodox review of Matt Walsh's Am I Racist? I have been watching reviews for days, even up to the minutes before doing this video, which I'm recording live right now. Thank you for those of you that are watching live right now and those of you that will watch later. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let's get it. I've watched plenty of reviews. Most of them have been from the conservative side, people who support Matt Walsh and his political perspective. And to their credit and to Matt Walsh, I just watched a video of him saying that there are no critics of the left. There are no typical from Variety magazine or Film Critic or, IMDb. Where are the people who review this? Where they have a high Rotten Tomato score. There's a lot about this video is in 1,500 theaters. And I just watched a video of Matt Walsh saying they will not review it because their narrative of the left is being exposed. And he makes a point that Hollywood feels like, or the left feel like they have the drop. They have the authority on movies and how to make movies and so forth. So his point was he's not getting a critical review from that side because he's exposing that side. And I think he very well may be right. All right. If you're unfamiliar with this movie, let's watch the trailer of the movie first, and then you'll see what we're talking about here. All right. This is the trailer currently in the movies of Matt Walsh's film, Am I Racist? All right.
Let's be clear, what's happening in this country, it's Nazism. Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up in the 90s, I never thought much about race. Sure, you noticed, but never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Being a white, straight, cisgender man, it's the top of the pile.
I'm on the top of the pile. That's me. Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
Can you please leave?
If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover. If I want to be an ally, I need to look like one.
What is racism?
Martin Luther King said not to judge people by
Martin Luther King said a lot of stuff.
Is America inherently racist?
What the hell is that?
The word inherent is challenging there. America is racist to its bones. All of the...
So inherently.
Yeah.
The entire system has to burn. And I'm not going to even use save this country. This country is not worth saving. This country is a piece of shit.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
They gon' say I'm racist.
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification. Where are you guys on your anti-racist journeys? So I'll look around the room and point to who we believe is the most racist person in the room. We want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument. Would you mind signing it? You will? What do you think about this issue of heteronormativity and how it intersects with the broader structures of racism in society?
They gon' say I'm racist.
What's up with white people? What are you doing to decenter your whiteness?
Who's making it the center? Why are they doing that?
And what you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. There's more for you in this field. White.
Folks.
White.
Trash.
White supremacy.
White woman.
White boy.
White.
Entitlement.
White.
Centering.
White.
Silence.
Is there a black person around here?
So there's a black person right here. Does he not exist?
They gon' say I'm racist, but they call everybody racist.
Hi, Robin.
Hi. And what's your name?
I'm Matt.
Matt. Hi, Matt.
Nice to meet you.
I just had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
They gon' say you racist, but they call.
I'm an idiot. I always press this button and then it doesn't. I got to press it really hard. I hate this. All right. I'm sorry about that. So what I was saying was, let me repeat that. All right. So this is a movie that from the it's shot from a political lens. All right. The political lens is conservative. Matt Walsh is a conservative, and he's pushing back against the political left. Right. So the whole DEI, and if you know about the last 12 years, which we're going to get into in a second, there was from Black Lives Matter to then CRT to then DEI is sort of the three pillars of the left ideology, which has to do with like racism, sexism, and all these different isms, right? That causes a lot of schisms. All right. From a political lens, this is a hilarious movie. It doesn't, even if you disagree with stuff that he's doing, it's just funny stuff. There's just funny stuff. I mean, people are just wild. And if we're being honest, the fact of his movie of What is a Woman, that we had to make a movie, a documentary about what is a woman, even ask that question, is insanity at its finest. Let's just be clear, right? We're a post-science society. There was a period where the Age of Enlightenment brought in the scientific method, which is hypothesis, analysis, and theory, and a lot of the culture shifted from faith to reason and science. And now we don't even have a science perspective. You can claim to be something because you feel it, and it doesn't matter if you're biologically, scientifically that. We're way gone. So movies like this that push back against the big ideologies, I think are necessary. I think they're good. They're good in that sense. It's satire. It's like Borat. I don't know if you remember watching Borat, where he would just Sacha Baron Cohen would just dress up as these things, and then he would interview people. He would just antagonize people and irritate people, right? In that lens, it's funny in that lens. And if you watch it from a political perspective, you're going to laugh at this because it highlights some of the weaknesses of the political left. However, the brilliance of the film is also the film's ignorance, because what you do is apart from Robin DiAngelo, who was the white woman with the glasses at the end, who wrote White Fragility, she would be of the upper echelon. Her, Ibram Kendi, maybe those are the Moses and Elijah of the left's sort of religious ideology, right? But if you were to take this and the left could do the same thing too, right? So making a movie about how foolish ideologies are and the way people think on the left is the same thing you could do on the right. Like, prime example, we're going to watch as a brief clip of this video. This is a guy who was a sovereign citizen, staunch conservative. He gets pulled over by police. This is not the left. He's on the conservative right. And listen, look at this. Let's see what happens here. This is what I mean about the film's brilliance is also its ignorance, because you can do the same thing. You can shoot a film from the other angle about people who are on the conservative side and come up with the same wildness, right? You could do a video called "Am I Not Racist?" or whatever, or do I worship Trump? And you would find stuff like this. This is just this happened a couple years ago, all right? This is not me. This is what happened a couple years ago, all right? Let me see. Here we go again. Boy, this is always happening. These technical difficulties. Hold on one second. Let me see. Oh, okay. I know what happened. You're such an annoying. All right, here we go. This thing has been doing this a lot, trying to get me mad, but I won't sin against it. I'm not going to do it. All right, here we go. Here's the video. Right, here we go.
I have been kind of between addresses, to be honest with you, and I don't have the mail for where I get the registration from. But I did notice that.
Will you step out for me?
No, sir.
Say again?
No, sir.
No, you won't?
No, sir.
Oh, yeah, you will. Step out. Step out or I'll break you.
See what I'm saying? My hands are up. Look. See what I'm saying, guys? Please just pray for me. Please, just pray for me. Sir, you're gonna have to get a warrant. I know my laws. You're gonna have to get a warrant, sir. This is for all of y'all. They can't tell me to get out of my vehicle. It's not considered my homestead. It's considered something different. But this is why I need protection right here. I'm doing nothing wrong. I've done nothing wrong.
Here we go. Watch this.
love y'all. Just pray for me. Just pray for me. If they shoot me, it's because everything that's going on. It's because I'm an honest man. I love you all. Please just pray for me. My hands are up. My hands are up in the air. I'm not doing anything. Please just pray for me. Please, somebody tag in Donald Trump. Donald Trump, if you can hear us, please, Donald Trump, please save me. Please save me, Donald Trump. Please. I'm asking you. Please save me. Please save me. Please get these people away from me. In dear God's name, please stop these people.
Please, Donald Trump, save me. You can do a whole movie of people who are like this. If this man were black, they would be like, man, he just, look what he's doing. He just said, step out of the car. He said, no, rolled his window up, and then start that. So what I'm saying is the brilliance of the movie is also its ignorance, because someone on the left could do the same movie called Am I Not Racist and highlight people like this. So from a political lens, if you watch this movie from a political lens, it's hilarious. And it makes so much sense, unless you're on the left and you're triggered and really offended. But if you're like me, who do not support the left politically or the right politically, but just try to be fair and objective as possible, trying to do this verse, trying to take no part in the unfruitful work, but instead expose them, then you come at things from a different perspective. And I don't look at DEI currently as the political left's agenda. I didn't look at Black Lives Matter as the political left's agenda. I didn't look at CRT as the political left's agenda. I always asked the question, Lord, what are you doing here? What are you trying to show us? To answer this question, let's do a briefer real quick of the last 12 years, all right? We gotta understand the last 12 years if we're going to process this movie. Because I'm not watching, this is an unorthodox review because I'm not reviewing it politically and I didn't see the movie cover to cover, but there's a deeper issue going on in what's happening in our culture. And if you only view it through the political lens, then you will see it, I think to some degree, as an issue with the left, and that would be 100% accurate. The left is wilding right now. But I think as a believer, I see things from a different lens, and I want to present that to you today. But first, let's look at historically. Let's get a historical look from the last 12 years. Because let's put this in perspective, okay? Let's put it in perspective. It's only been 12 years since the emergence of like Black Lives Matter, all right? So 2012, 2013, Trayvon Martin was killed and Black Lives Matter started. So the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who was a Hispanic man who shot and killed a young kid named Trayvon Martin, right? In 2012, sparked protests that led to the creation of the hashtag Black Lives Matter, which was a company or an organization founded by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Now, let me say this from the get-go. When that hashtag came out, full disclosure, I understood. I understood what the hashtag meant. I did not support the women. In fact, I hated what they did because they tried to hijack a movement, which eventually proved to be for selfish gain. I was glad the Lord gave me the discernment. I did not support Black Lives Matter at all. I didn't march for none of them, but I understood the hashtag. And it wasn't what people thought, like, well, what about abortion? That's not what the hashtag was about. The hashtag was about the societal pressures, the law enforcement, the people who are sworn to protect us seem to justify taking the lives of black people. Whether you agree with that or not, that's what they were trying to communicate. And as a black man, having had my own history with law enforcement, I understood that, right? But then it got worse. Then in 2014, the deaths of Eric Garner and Michael Brown led to widespread protests and the rapid growth of Black Lives Matter. That was it. They went to Ferguson, started marching, and all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter it went from a hashtag to a slogan that was being communicated. It was either hands up, don't shoot, I can't breathe, from Eric Garner being choked to death for selling cigarettes by, I think it was Long Island Police Department, I think if I remember correctly. And then the Mike Brown, which I don't know if was a true narrative. I think it was proven that he didn't have his hands up, don't shoot. But that was the slogans that came out. It was hands up, don't shoot. It was I can't breathe, and it was Black Lives Matter. And that began to be the reality. Over the next couple of years, presumably in 2015 and 16, protests erupted following the deaths of Walter Scott, Freddie Gray. Was in Baltimore. I went to Baltimore. Me and a buddy of mine drove up to Baltimore, and with my camera, I was shooting protests at Baltimore's Capitol Hill. There were marches. It was crazy because black men got killed in police custody. There were a number of different, and these weren't like, they said this was leftist media, but the reality was the media was taking footage from cell phones. They were taking footage from cell phones and putting it on their news broadcasts so people could see these things, right? And then obviously, if you've been around, in 2020, George Floyd's murder, the murder of George Floyd by a police officer sparked global protests, bringing renewed attention to systemic racism and police violence. And then ongoing debates of critical race theory became a focal point in discussions about how racism is addressed in education, with debates over curricula and so forth. So over the last 12 years, let's put this in perspective. America is, the continent, from when the colonists came, 1607, right? When the first slaves came, 1619. So let's just say from 1619 on, when black people were here, for 405 years, we have existed in this dichotomy, all right? And then it became America in 1776. And then it became the freedom of slaves in 1865. And then Jim Crow came about 12 years after that, okay? So I'm not going to do the math right now, but if you look at American society, the vast majority of American society has been the oppression of black people from white people. If America is, 419 years old, then about 360 years, give or take, of American history has been the oppression of white people towards black people. That's not woke. That's just the reality, all right? But in the last 12 years is when actual pushback came towards white individuals, white people, white communities, not the civil rights era. Civil rights era was Martin Luther King and others were pushing back against the whole system, governmental system, and trying to say, listen, like Frederick Douglass, you created a constitution that said people have rights, and you're not letting people have these rights. And they marched and marched and marched, and then became civil rights legislation in 1964. All right. So let's just say that ended at least the historic racism and oppression that had been known for the hundreds of years prior to that, 1964. Doesn't mean it ended all racism, right? But it ended the historic legal precedent where you were allowed to be a racist, essentially, towards black people in particular, all right? That's 60 years ago, all right? In the 48 years later, in the last 12 years, is the first time in American history, where white people, white men, cis heterosexual Christian men, white men and white women have been feeling the pressure of how they've benefited from slavery. Martin Luther King wasn't talking about white privilege and that stuff, even though it was obvious he made the point. He didn't use that terminology. So these terms like white privilege and white supremacy, all these things are what came up. And then the idea of reparations started to come up because black people felt like you haven't righted the wrong. But then the conservatives came back with, well, what about this, legislation? And then they was like, well, there's still systemic racism. And they were like, well, define systemic. And it was all this back and forth, and people got tired of it. But then the reality was, and the smoke screen of all of it, from a numbers perspective, it was the first time in a country that's 400, if we're going 1609, we're just going 1619. We're just starting there. We're not even talking about 1607 when the first colonists came. From 1619 to, that's 405 years. For the first time in American history, in 405 years, the last 12 years, white people have been on edge. They've been like, whoa, wait a minute. We're being persecuted against. We're being oppressed against. They're trying to pass laws to target us, right? It's only been 12 years in light of hundreds of years of black people having to experience that oppression, that racism, overtly, legally. If you're a conservative or white, and you're upset about any laws that have been passed in the last 12 years, you have felt nothing compared to what black people have experienced for hundreds of years. And so when you put this in perspective and just let's get out of the political realm, we're gonna look at this from a sort of historical, a biblical / American historical lens. That's how I see these things. I do not see these politically, because if I have to see this politically, I think Matt Walsh is on point. If I look at this, Am I Racist movie politically, I think he makes some hilarious, valid points about the way that the left is responding, about the political left and the way all of that stuff, DE, anti-racism, all of it. So much of it was such a hoax. And that's what he proves in the movie. So much of the people who, it's a hustle. It's a hustle. Sidebar, but if you consider that America is a company that cares more about capitalism, so the actual color of racism in America is green, not black versus white. If you consider America as a country that cares about capital, and the American dream is essentially you can come to America and be rich and have wealth and have status. If you have a good idea, if you have a work ethic, you can do it. Then the race grievance industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is an American success story. If you're going to view it, like if we view it from a socioeconomic status, then you can't get mad at Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi, or anyone else who profited, Ta-Nehisi Coates, anyone who profited, even Vodi Bakum, who wrote a book against these things, or Matt Walsh. These are all a part of the same woke industry. So you have to give the woke industry an A+ for being a marketing capital cash cow. It's a multi-million billion-dollar industry. From that perspective, what are you mad for? This is what the American dream is. You can say, I have racial grievances and I can make millions off of it. Why are you mad at Robin DiAngelo for she didn't force anyone to read Right Fragility. Robin DiAngelo, Ibram Kendi didn't force anyone to be anti-racist. They had an idea, they convinced people it was good, and they ran with it. How was that different from the Great Depression that happened because all white rich bankers created false stocks? All these people invested money in those stocks, and those bankers sold them, they pulled their money out, and because there were no real stocks, the economy crashed. They made millions of dollars back then, which would be billions today equivalent, and all these people, the whole country was decrepit for over a decade. When white people do it, it's like, hey, it's just business, man, it's this. But when black people do it, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And that's what I think the bigger problem is. I think the Lord is doing something else. The Lord doesn't have a political lens in which he sees these things through. So from a political lens, the last 12 years, yeah, I give the movie its credit. I think it's accurate. I think it uses humor to show the lunacy in DEI and all of these things. And if that's the only way you view I am racist, then you gotta on some level, you gotta side with Matt Walsh on some level. But here's the problem, and here's what I think is actually happening in our culture. And here's how I see things. I think Black Lives Matter, CRT, critical race theory, and DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. All of that, I think it's about historical reckoning from the Lord. I do not think this is about the leftist policies. I think it's historical reckoning from the Lord. Let me give you a couple verses to show you what I'm talking about. And then I want to walk you through why I think this is happening from this way and why I see the movie from this lens. Let me give you a couple thoughts. First one is Galatians 6:7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he will also reap. All right, keep in mind that America, even though the notion of being a Christian nation didn't actually really get promoted until the 1950s when they started to put it on money. And then it wasn't really what people were saying, but America was largely the country of religious freedom. I mean, the settlers who came, the colonists who came, many of them came because they were leaving England and the King of England and the Church of England and all of those things for religious freedom. In fact, we call it the American Revolution, but if you go to Britain, they call it the Presbyterian War. They had a religious bent to it because from their perspective, this was about who determines what religion you can serve. So as America became from the colonists to a country, a certified country after the American Revolution, religion has been a part of it. The church has been a part of it. Some of the earliest pastors in American, when they came, were John Cotton and Cotton Mather. These were Reformed pastors. And all of them were using the Bible to promote something like slavery that takes freedom. And the Bible is nothing about the liberation of freedom, right? So you have to understand, God, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked, right? Then you have stuff like Matthew 12, verses 41 and 42. Listen to what Jesus says to the Jews of his day. He says, the men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. And he says this in verse 42. The queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. All right, so what is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, look, there's going to be judgment against you from previous people because you are not listening. There are consequences. The historical people are going to judge you in the present. And it was, if Jesus said it, so it must be literal. That somehow people who weren't even alive in this generation, in the current generation that Jesus is talking to, are going to judge them for their actions. All right, that's what Jesus is saying. You are going to be judged for your actions against me from previous generations. This is not a foreign concept to God. In fact, he doubles down. Jesus doubles down when he says this in Matthew 20:23. Here's what he says. He says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of you who kill and crucify, some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you, listen to this, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Let me make sure you understand what Jesus is saying. He's talking at the time to modern day Pharisees and saying that all of the historical bloodshed of all the righteous people you will be responsible for. You are going to hell for that, even though these Pharisees were not alive then. But he's saying you are in the spirit of the ancestors who killed the prophets. So this is not unbiblical for God to say that not only are previous generations going to come up and rise against you for your current sins, but I'm going to also attribute to you all of the sins of people who were righteous that were killed that you weren't even alive for. But yet you are, because Jesus is the King of Kings and the Prophet of Prophets, and you're basically, Jesus is saying you're basically killing all of the righteous. That's a crazy statement that we're not going to unpack, because that's a bold statement for Jesus to say that because of who Jesus is so righteous that killing him is akin to killing all of the prophets from Abel up to him. That's a crazy statement. That shows you the scope of Jesus's righteousness. That from Abel on up, the Pharisees are going to be considered liable for the blood of all the righteous people because they're killing Jesus. Principally, that's Jesus what he's saying. Principally, what is God saying? It is not beyond God to say you in the current generation are responsible for the bloodshed of the previous generation. Because you're desecrating my name, Jesus, in person. And I think the church in America that's supposed to be a nation that prized itself on religious freedom in the Bible, decimated the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, and even had theologians teaching like Jonathan Edwards and then promoting slavery. And in the modern era, when you bring that up, people will say, well, they were just men of their times. But you do not call people who committed abortion, who do abortion, people of their times. You do not call the Germans who persecuted the Jews men of their times. You do not call when in the early 20th century, there was a debate of Darwinism versus church. You do not call Darwinism and the people men of their times. You don't do that. You do it when it's selective. And I think God has looked at all of this and said, these people are crazy if they think that I'm not going to have anything to say about this. So what am I getting at in all of this? I think Black Lives Matter, from God's perspective, he's allowed Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, and DEI to be historical reckoning. I am not saying that God approves of these tactics. No. In the same way that God would allow the Assyrians or the Babylonians or other Amorites and the Jebusites, any other nations to rise up against Israel's disobedience, I think it is beholden of God to allow certain movements or people to rise up and push back as consequences for the sins from the past, as we just heard, and the current sins of people, especially a country like America that presumably prides itself, or used to, on being a Christian nation. From a biblical American historical perspective, Black Lives Matter, CRT, and DEI make sense to me, even though I disagree with all of them. I don't think they add value in the way that the left does, for sure. For sure. I don't think they add value. However, when you put it in context, I think white people, particularly white conservatives that are pushing back, are thinking, hey, civil rights legislation was 60 years ago. What's happening here? What I'm saying is, and what I think that God is doing is, you cannot be deceived. God cannot be mocked, right? God cannot be mocked. Do not be deceived. There are consequences. There are consequences that last a lot longer than the actions that happen. And God can determine how those consequences will play out. We don't have the luxury because he's a holy God that knows what he's talking about. Let me prove the point a little bit. So a few years ago, I was asked to do a review of Vodi Bachum's book, Fault Lines, right? Now, let me say this. I debated Vodi in 2021 or 2022, right before the book dropped. We had a great debate. It was a good time. I really respected it. There were things that he said that I banged with. I respected him. And he respected me. We left that debate, me and Vodi. We left that debate and we were like, hey, as a matter of fact, he wanted to continue to go on tour nationally with the conversation we had because he so appreciated it. And I think he appreciated it because I wasn't afraid to. I think they thought I was going to be a BLM dude and they were just going to mop the floor with me, him and Tim Brindle. But that's not the case. I didn't support Black Lives Matter at all. But I'm also not afraid to criticize black people. As one who comes from the lifestyle, I'll critique. I'm an equal opportunity offender because I try to apply Ephesians 5:11. We had a great debate. Shortly after that, the book dropped, and someone, a Gospel Coalition, got to me and asked me would I do a review of the book. So I said sure. Read the book, wrote a review, but they were scared to print my review because my review was too scathing. And it wasn't because I had a problem. I respect Vodi Bachum. We had just debated. But the things that he said and did in the book, I just had a problem with. So I want to read an excerpt of that because this will give you the why I'm saying that there is a historical reckoning happening based on a premise that Vodi Bachum presented in the book that a lot of people, conservatives, still use to this day. So I want you to see this. I'm going to read this so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to take my face off for a second just so you can see this clear, all right? Here's what I wrote in part of my review. On page 44, under the heading Real Justice Requires Truth, Vodi acknowledges our pursuit of justice must also be characterized by a pursuit of truth. This is a main theme for Fault Lines, truth versus non-truth. Vodi uses a few verses indicating what justice on God's terms look like. One verse that shows up on the page 44 and 48 is Proverbs 18:17. It is one of my favorite verses, and it becomes the grid that Vodi distinguishes between biblical justice and social justice. Proverbs 18:17 says, the one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. For Vody, the first case that presents itself is the critical social justice narrative of systemic racism, etc., versus biblical truth that comes to examine the first case, which is what his perspective is. Whether Vody meant to or not, he frames the book in such a way that biblical truth is to agree with him, and to disagree is submission to unbiblical truth, or rather embracing critical social justice, CRT, systemic racism, etc. There are two fundamental problems with framing the book this way. The first is the practical application of Proverbs 18:17. The one who presents his case first seems right. To Vody is the systemic racism, oppressed versus oppressors, police are humming down black people mantras and so forth. And while I understand why he would start there, the Black Lives Matter narrative is not the first case that presents itself. The BLM narrative is a response to the first case that has been presenting itself since the late 1800s. I say this as someone who does not support BLM. I have been caring about black issues long before Karen was Karen, and I find BLM to be a demonic distraction to the real issues. They have demonstrated that they do not care about all black lives, just the ones that give them opportunity to promote their cause. However, they are not the first case. The first case narrative is, in quotation, the issues in the black community are solely the result of the culture within the black community. Slavery and Jim Crow have no reverberating consequences, and for many is just an excuse to play the victim. Some form of this narrative has been pervasive in American society since the emancipation of slaves in 1863. All right, so make sure you understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that Vody Bakum and people under conservatives, they present this Proverbs 18:17 as if Black Lives Matter is the first, that they're the first case that presents itself, but then when you apply like biblical logic to it, then it proves to be false. That's not true. The Black Lives Matter is a frustrated response to people saying things that they've been saying for 100 and something years. For example, look at this right here. These are quotations now from publications from the 1800s and the 1900s, long before black people, before systemic racism was even done. Keep in mind what you're about to read are perspectives of people, white society, long before civil rights legislation in the 1960s even happened, before the laws were even passed by Lyndon Johnson, who did it as a result of JFK being shot, right? Before all of that happens, here is the reality. Here's what's being said here. It says, during Reconstruction, from 1863 to March 1877, opponents of the black freedom struggle deployed preemptive, apocalyptic, slippery slope arguments that have remained during features of backlash politics up to the present. So backlash politics are what we call in the modern era identity politics. See, when it became the left and it became about racism and black, it was identity politics. But for the longest time in American history, identity politics were done by white people for the promotion of white people and no one else. But now it's identity politics when black people talk about these things. But when white people had it, it wasn't identity politics. But it's backlash politics. It says they treated federal support for African American civil rights, economic and social equality, however delayed, reluctant, underfunded, and incomplete it may have been, as a cataclysmic overreaction, and framed it as a far more dangerous threat to liberty than the injustice it was designed to address. Do you understand what I'm saying? That white people's response to black people wanting equal rights was that this is dangerous and this is going too far. This is, keep in mind, this is well before Black Lives Matter. This is the first narrative. In 1867, not even 2 years after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, the Brooklyn Daily Daigle, this is Brooklyn, right? This is New York. This is not Alabama. We always hear that it was only in the Jim Crow South. Remember that Jackie Robinson played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. That was New York, right? It says they decried the placement of political power in the hands of a property-less and ignorant class of the population and pronounced that the pending Reconstruction scheme must be abandoned. Right? This is an excerpt from the Atlantic article published in 2020. Listen to this. Ben H. Bagdikian, a writer for the Saturday Evening Post, in a 1964 article a month prior to the presidential election highlighting the sentiments of white voters, wrote, "Backlashers are not against a better life for the Negro, but they are strongly against this being achieved at the cost of white tranquility. The elevation of tranquility over equal justice for all was a hallmark of black discourse, backlash discourse, which ranked white feelings over black rights. An anecdotal response penned by The Atlantic argued backlashers understood civil rights as a zero sum and therefore treated campaigns for African American equality as inexcusable, undermining of what they saw as deserved white privileges and prerogatives. A New York Times 1964 poll revealed in condensed form the emotional landscape of the white backlash. This is a quote from the 1964 article. Keep in mind, this is prior to civil rights, prior to Martin Luther King even being assassinated, prior to all of any legislation. It said northern whites, this is not southern whites, this is not the Jim Crow South. Northern white urbanites have no sympathy for the Negro's plight and believe the civil rights movement has gone too far, while a considerable percentage believe Negroes don't appreciate what we're doing for them, end quote. Negroes don't appreciate what we're doing for them. This is with laws against black people for almost everything but breathing. These are redlining. These are voting rights. These are basic civil rights. These are, you had Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, but all you did was take a handful of black people and put them in a white school where their lives were threatened. You didn't take any white kids and put them in black schools. You didn't take any black teachers and put them in white schools. You didn't take any white teachers and put them in black schools, but you created vouchers so that white people could create public and private schools to move their kids away, still furthering the racial distance and racial narrative. This comment, Negroes don't appreciate what we're doing for them, is essentially what? Letting us live in your country even though the black people built it? This is what you have to understand. This is where people get offended. Go ahead and click off if you need to. This is all history. This isn't about being woke. This is just historical reckoning. Do not think for a moment, whether you believe in God or not, that God thinks, hey, that happened a long time ago. No, God thinks that happened and we're going to deal with it. That's why Jesus said, you're going to be judged by people long before you. This is why Jesus said the blood of all the righteous is going to be on your head. You know how long ago Abel was alive from when Jesus said that? That was thousands of years have passed since Abel, the first person murdered in Genesis 4, was alive. And Jesus said, you modern day Pharisees in 3033 AD are responsible for the blood of Abel thousands of years ago because he was righteous. There was a historical reckoning that Jesus was saying is going to happen. What I'm proposing from my perspective is what's happening today is more about a historical reckoning than simply just the wiles of the political left. I am not saying that God approves of, is pleased with, or endorses it. I'm saying God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. If you treat people this way and use God and the Bible to do it, do not think that God has forgotten, or because a few laws have changed, that somehow there will not be a historical reckoning. That is not the God. Whether you believe in God or not, I do. And this is my channel. That is not the God that I serve. This is how white people thought 60 years ago. 60 years ago. Let's continue. The expansion of sympathy, such as being in favor of a better life for the Negro, was then conditional on personal convenience and easily withdrawn. The scope of my article doesn't permit me to get further, and then I explain a little bit more about what I was trying to say in my article. Then I say this. Some of you may be thinking, yeah, but that was 60 years ago, bro. You're right. On Tuesday, April 27th, 2021, Business Insider published a brief article on an interaction between two GOP representatives, two Republicans. GOP State Representative Ray Garofalo of Louisiana, Jim Crow South, on Tuesday said that public schools and colleges should teach the good of slavery during discussions about race as part of a bill that he proposed that would bar divisive concepts from classrooms. In other words, don't put things in that talk about the brutality of slavery, only talk about the things that were good about slavery. That was the bill that was proposing. Garofalo, who chairs the House Education Committee, said during a hearing on the bill, also known as HB 564, that his legislation sought to remove politics out of the classroom and cultivate a learning environment free of discrimination. When Garofalo began to explain how slavery could be taught in the classrooms, his comments elicited derision. If you're having a discussion on slavery, then you can talk about everything dealing with slavery, the good, the bad, the ugly, he said. His suggestion was immediately dismissed by fellow Republican Representative Stephanie Hilferty. There's no good to slavery, though, she said. You see what I mean? This is the first case narrative at work. Even our elected officials can't see the reality. Slavery was good only to those who owned slaves. Contrast that with Germany and 17 other countries that have made Holocaust denial and any celebration of Nazis, Third Reich, or Hitler a federal crime with mandatory 5-year imprisonments. They understand the horror of their historical sin in the Holocaust. In America, we celebrate the Confederate heroes as a part of our history, men who were traitors that killed Americans in order to keep slavery alive. I have never heard a proposal for teaching the good of the Holocaust, though. I've never. This is my point. And this is why, for me, am I racist from a political lens is a funny, hilarious, satirical exposing of the ideology that the left largely promotes. And if you look at it from a political lens, then Am I Racist is a crazy movie. You're going to die laughing. Just from the clips that I saw, I busted out laughing. Unless you're really, really on the left and you're offended at these things being exposed, you just can't help it. They're true things. However, you could do a video called Am I Not Racist and interview ignorant white people, conservatives, and you would see stuff like, Trump, please save me. I'm sorry. You would see the same thing. So that doesn't really hold weight. So what's the real issue here? From a political lens, maybe, but from a biblical American historical lens, that's how I see it. I think here's my point. Here's my main point. This is what I think. I'm gonna put it on the screen. America, particularly in the context of race, this is not about assigning blame to modern individuals for the sins of their ancestors. No, that's not what this is. Rather, it's recognizing that societal structures and cultural narratives established by those past sins still affect us today. In a sense, America is reaping what was sown through its historical mistreatment of African Americans, women, the poor, etc. Proverbially speaking, previous generations of mistreated Black Americans, this is what, remember when Jesus said the Ninevites are going to rise up? Proverbially speaking, I believe that previous generations of mistreated Black Americans are rising up through modern social movements to judge the nation's past actions. So movies like Am I Racist and all this stuff, to me, all that's happening right now, the political turmoil, what did you expect, America? Like, what did you expect? Like, you cannot, I mean, God has common grace. He deals with things on a common grace level too, but America said it's the Christian nation. You hear people talk about, well, it was the Christians who ended slavery in America, but it was the Christians who also promoted it in America. You don't get a pat on the back. A husband doesn't get a pat on the back because he stops beating his wife. You weren't supposed to beat her in the first place, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is, like, if you watch Am I Racist politically, it's hilarious. The left is exposed. But is this really a left issue? I don't think so, because I believe in God as sovereign. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in providence. And I believe God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And that means men reap what they sow. And I think it's hilarious. I'm going to be honest with you. Only in this sense is it hilarious. Only in this sense. And hilarious is more being a figure of speech, and I actually laugh at it like I would a good joke. I think that in the last 12 years, white people have gotten a small taste. White women with the Karen thing have gotten just a fraction of what God allowed Black people to go through hundreds of years for the benefit of white people. I'm not saying that God did it to benefit white people, but white people benefited from that for hundreds of years. You know what's interesting? And I'm going to end with this. Whenever we talk about these issues, if you talk to a conservative, they'll say stuff like this. Yeah, but what about meritocracy? Nothing's stopping you from being racist now. Like good job, go to school, get an education, get married, have a family, all these things, right? They list all these things, and they're good things to do. And they make it seem like all you have to do is just work hard and all that. But here's the reality. That's basically saying to all the black people who do not or are not successful that they just don't work hard enough because meritocracy exists. Does it really, though? So are all the poor white people in Appalachia, right? All the people that Trump promised he was going to bring coal back to their cities, which is why they voted for him. They thought he was the non-politician. Are all those poor white people, none of those white people worked hard? So according to the standards of meritocracy that a lot of white conservatives bring up, or black conservatives, whatever, it's not even about white and black anymore. It's a political agenda, political affiliation. All the conservatives. So you mean to tell me that none of those people, all of my, remember J.D. Vance, the current vice president elect, or not elect, but candidate with Trump, he wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy in 2016. When I read that book, I thought this is a game changer. This proves that this isn't really about race, but about class, because he was describing in his book, growing up in Appalachia, poor white people, white trash, white, that he said, I've heard these names used a lot to describe black people. This is in the introduction of his book, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I've heard these terms used a lot to describe black people, but I've known these people too, but they were all white. He's basically saying that the poor white people he grew up with almost were identical in their numbers of drug use, high school dropout rates, pregnancy rates, domestic abuse, and drug rates. In fact, if I could have showed you an interview that he did where he said to a woman during the epidemic, the white drug epidemic, not the crack of the 80s where they were super predators, but the white drug epidemic of like meth and all that kind of stuff, right? He said the reason why it's such an epidemic because these people have lost hope because their communities have been rattled, and people were like agreeing with that because they were white. So it was a health crisis for white people, but it was max prison terms when black people had a drug health crisis. So again, I'm not on the left or the right. As a believer, I try to process this well. I think Matt Walsh's movie is a funny movie, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help anyone. It's just you're either going to agree with it because you are tired of all the stuff, or you're going to just be angry at it because you think he manipulated people to say what they say. Whatever you think. But from a biblical American historical perspective, I don't think this has anything to do with the left or DEI. I think those things are God allowing them to teach people that you cannot be mocked. You reap what you sown. Like you mock Lizzo for being fat and talking about body shaming, but why wouldn't you? What do you expect, America? You highlighted a very narrow group of white women and said they're the supermodels, they're the beautiful people, they're this, they're that. And then you lie, and now with technology, you airbrush these women's bodies, you make them look, they don't even look as good as they look on these magazines. So of course people are going to lash out and say, who cares how we look? Now don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people that think if you're fat like me, you should be cool with it. And it's just, no, I don't think that stuff is good at all. But my point is, I understand the backlash. So here's what I'm trying to tell you. Understand the backlash. I'm not saying you have to agree with it or like it. I don't like the left. I'm not with the left. I'm not with their policies. I don't like their right. But I understand it. And I think I see what the Lord is doing. So I'm not worried about who sits in the White House because I trust who sits on the white throne. But I do understand where this is coming from, I think. America is reaping what it's sown. And it's sad to me that white people are so offended and so, woe is me. They can't handle being called Karens and white supremacists and things like that. And having a few laws like diversity, equity, and be passed in their favor. Sorry, but black people have dealt with far worse for far longer than any of you. In that sense alone, you get no sympathy from me. In that sense. No, I think you got to learn how to persevere just like we do. But even then, you don't have to deal with it because you could dismiss all of these things in ways that have happened. So yeah, I think a lot of these white people who go to these diversity meetings, I think they realize, hey, I want to learn and grow in this. I think they're doing about it the wrong way, but at the same time, I think, listen, America is reaping what it's sown. This is the freest our country's ever been. No slavery, apparently, no oppression, no mistreatment of women, none of that stuff. This is the freest America's ever been from 1607 to right now. This is the freest America's ever been. And let's just be clear. Let's be clear. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young. This is the most vitriolic and most insane our culture has ever been. And this is not just because of the left. This is God allowing Satan to do what he does. And part of it, I think, is these things are rising up. It is biblical for God to allow the past to rise up and judge the present. And I think all of this stuff is that. So I don't think, while Matt Walsh's movie is a good knee slapper, I don't think it's going to make a dent at all. Because they're going to, and that's why people don't even care. It's not because they're just a political motivation. I think God is allowing white people in many ways to experience a little bit in the most minute scale of what black people have experienced. The people who have been oppressed. God cares about the oppressed. And he doesn't ignore them just because conservatives do or conservative Christians do. He just doesn't. He doesn't ignore them. And he doesn't ignore things that happened a long time ago. That's why Jesus said the blood of Abel. God remembers all of it and is going to judge all of it. And do not think that a few decades of some laws that have changed that weren't even fully implemented for decades until decades after those laws were passed changes that. God cannot be mocked. So this is an unorthodox review of the movie. I did not watch Am I Racist cover to cover. I watched a ton of reviews that were all positive about it. Only watched one or two that had negative critiques about it, and I watched clips of it, and the clips made me laugh. But I wasn't going to drive 40 minutes to go watch a movie because I don't care about that type of stuff. I get Matt Walsh's angle. I know his rhetoric. I get it. But as a believer, I just think it's bigger than the political lens in which we highlight and condense these things to. You can disagree. You can unsubscribe. No offense, but I don't care if you do. I'm always going to say what I think and try to bring a biblical perspective to it. And I understand, especially when you talk about this type of issues, people will get offended. But if you're not offended and you stick with me, I appreciate you. Thank you for being a gangster. And now we'll go to the tape and see what's over here. See what we're talking about. Yeah, I didn't have sound on. Can't hear you. Yeah. Different sides of the same coin. Worley said 100%. 100% believe. Yep. In Utah, a man lost his life doing the same nonsense as another silent citizen in his early 20s. I think if we get 100%. 100%. The love of money is the root of all evil, which is one of the reasons why slavery now, it is drug trafficking cartels, have slave owner mentality, and the worst. Yeah, 100%. I mean, that right there is what I think the real issue is about slavery in American history. It's that, my brother. It's that. It's the love of money. Slavery was about the color green, not the color black. That's what it was. Because if you think about it, when the slaves were freed, what happened after that? There were basically economic sanctions against black people, right? We're not going to allow you to have money and make money until black. And then what did black people do later on in response to that? Was boycott. We're not giving you our money. It's always about finances, bro. Jesus is saying that they will be judged by the previous generation. He's just saying, like them, you kill and try to destroy those who speak for him, and now I'm here. I agree but disagree with you, Caleb. I don't think that's what he was saying. Just that. I get you, but this isn't a theological discussion, though. I'm using that passage principally to say that it's not beyond God to hold people responsible for things of the past. We could go to Second Kings? What was that? Man, what was that? 1 Kings 19 with Josiah, where Josiah is they find the book Deuteronomy and they read it and they tear their clothes, and Josiah says, "Go inquire of the Lord, because I think we're in trouble for the sins of our ancestors." And they do, and then God says he's going to judge the current generation for the sins of the ancestors. And so Josiah is one of the few kings in Judah that does a lot of reform because the impending judgment against them from God saying, and these people weren't even the ones that did it. So that you're talking about, contextually, sure, but this isn't an exegetical statement. That was more me saying that. So we might agree to disagree there, and that's fine. But I don't want to have a theological discussion because I'm using it to make a different point, that it is not above God to hold responsible people historically who are connected to him. So I do believe he's saying, no, you're responsible for the blood, because Jesus is saying, I am the epitome of the righteous. I'm the righteous one. So all of the blood of the righteous is held back, is held against you all for your sins against me, because someone greater is here. So I don't want to go back and forth with that, brother. So I'm not going to put those comments up. Wow, as you are reading, I can come to tears, man. That's heavy stuff for sure. 100%, Marlon. Like, I don't think it's that complicated. Like, I don't like it. Don't get me wrong. I don't support any of it, but I understand where it comes from. That's my job. This is where people get offended at me. They think if I don't agree with them, I understand what's happening. At least I think I do. I think I've studied this heavily. There was so much I skipped because I wasn't trying to make a 4-hour video, but I've studied this significantly. But a lot of the narratives that white people are saying, that they're accusing black people of saying now, white people were saying during Jim Crow era that blacks are demanding too much. This was back before the laws were even passed. So it's like, okay, well, that was them. Well, there's consequences for that. That's what I think. So definitely appreciate the history lesson on the country, further affirming this was never a Christian nation, just people perverting God's word for their own benefit. 100%, man. I agree. This is a good take, bro. Yeah. The real issue is just sin. I agree, Jose, but I think sometimes if we just make it that simple, we don't take it that serious. I think so let's talk about what sin is it. I think it was the decimation of the second greatest commandment. So this is what I think. I think American history destroyed loving your neighbor as yourself. So God is rising up all these people saying, well, we're going to force you to love us because you don't have a choice. We're going to force you to love us. We're going to make you love us. That's what I think is happening. That's how I say it. So yeah, it is just sin, but I want to make sure that it's not, we don't just, because that's too simplistic. And people, yeah, it's just sin. You wouldn't go, if someone came to your small group and said, hey guys, I just want to confess pride. You wouldn't say, okay, we'll pray for you. You'd want to know what specifically are you talking about? As pride can mean a lot of things. I think we don't want to just call it sin. We want to call out what is done and its pushback against the body of Christ. Brother Kurt, small Christian channel, Corey Mana had a conversation, but it was an interesting expose on Joel Webbin, who says the most racist things and thinks it is not racist, who's a pastor. Yeah, I think I know who, a smart Christian channel, something like that. Yeah, I don't watch a lot of his stuff. But I'm not surprised though. I'm not surprised. I mean, you got theologians who will say their favorite historical theologian was basically a racist. Like, that's just reality. So I just think that. Brother, please do a show about Joe Webbin and Christian nationalism. Simple stuff is gonna. Yeah, we'll talk about that. I'll get to that. Okay, a lot of know. Are you trying to show your skills? I don't care who is in the White House, but who's in the White Throne, America. 100%. That's how we do, baby. You know, I still rap. Don't get it twisted. I have to be light because the subject is a tough one. Thanks for your perspective. No, thank you, bro. I appreciate it. I'm truly sick of all this stuff, to be honest. Yeah, so am I, but we don't have a choice. This is where we live. So I think I want to try to understand it. So again, Ephesians 5:11, I want to take no part in it, right? But I want to expose the deeds of darkness. And then I want to be able to, hopefully by the grace of God, pray for and demonstrate character that shows how we're supposed to live. But I don't think how we're supposed to, like if I just look at, am I racist from what I've seen, I don't think it's going to help anyone who struggles with thinking that racism exists. It's just going to mock them for it. So in that sense, but that wasn't what it was intended to do. And I think as believers, we're intended to do those things in a certain way. I think one of the problems with how the issue is addressed is that the present day people are still grouped primarily as black people and white people. Certainly, historically, even up to a few decades ago, there were real world harms actively inflicted against people with black skin. And as you point, skip one. And as you point out, there continue to be detrimental consequences to those people for those who are still alive and their descendants. Yeah. Recognizing the category of skin color in this context is not unreasonable. Right. My concern is that we will continue to treat this characteristic as a central differentiator of people groups indefinitely into the future. I don't think so. I appreciate what you're saying, Daniel. I don't think so at all. I think we're moved. You have a bunch of people who are like black people who are conservatives, like, hey, I don't fit the narrative, right? So you have that. So there's a bunch of people. The issue is becoming political. It's not becoming group identity. That's still being used because that's the main, we're still too close to the history of when that was the defining characteristic was race. Then people say, well, no, this is, I love this. Well, race is a social construct, so there's no such thing as racism. Okay, but Martin Luther King's assassination wasn't a social construct. The KKK burning crosses wasn't a social construct. All the laws that legally prohibited black people from making progress weren't social constructs. So if you want to say race is a social construct, what people did as a result of that social construct was not a social construct. So again, I think we're moving towards a political society. It's really moving towards an us versus them, left versus right. Maybe someone rises up with a middle position that could change things, but I think that's largely what we're talking about. So this is gonna be my last comment because it's over an hour, and I don't want this. I'm not gonna get anyone's not gonna watch this video. Dang, I didn't know any of this stuff. I always thought America is reaping what, but I didn't know the history that runs deep. Yeah, brother, I think that's why I did this video. I honestly think what we're seeing right now is just America reaping what it's sown. That's what it is. It's just that. It's not. I don't think it's more or less. I don't think it's the left. It's the right. I think America is reaping what it's sown. Think about it. This is a country that would base itself on the Bible. It's the freest it's ever been and the most chaotic it's ever been, because the freedom has nothing to do with what the Bible actually teaches. So that's why it's promoting fear, both the left and the right. Do you know what's going to happen if Kamala gets in the White House? Do you know what's going to happen if Trump gets back in there, what he's going to do? And so, but we're not given a spirit of fear. The Bible teaches us, but of power, love, and self-control. So with that being said, I just think like, yeah, this is the world we live in, and we want to try to take no part in it, but we want to expose it. And that's what I hope to do today. So appreciate you. And lastly, LaTanya, always appreciate your input, bro. Stop provoking. Thank you, LaTanya. Appreciate you. Always appreciate y'all. Like and subscribe to the channel. If this offended you and you had to leave, thanks for being here for as long as you were. It is what it is. I get it. All right, y'all. We'll see y'all on the next video. Grace and peace.